city lights. The moon glows in the night. The god and the goddess are still one. We may lack electricity, but we regain simplicity. There's more to life than profit in my community.
For a further comparison, here is another example of normal development. Notice the firm gingiva, the normal coloring tones, the beautiful broad mouth, the full jaw with obvious power. This animal happens to be a male, but the comparison is nonetheless valid. Here is another illustrative comparison. The raw milk female gets in 20 or 30 licks for every one of the pasteurized milk female, then leaps away in disgust. These were all first-generation animals, born of theoretically healthy parents, and who themselves were healthy at the beginning of the study. Disturbing as these observations might be, the impaired balance, the lack of energy, the dental deterioration, some of the most significant findings emerged as Pottenger extended his study down to the second and third generations. Almost immediately, Pottenger noticed that animals fed the raw meat diet for 2 generations appeared larger than the same generation of cooked meat cats. At 16 weeks, this second-generation raw meat cat weighs 2,000 grams, while the second-generation cooked meat animal only comes up to 1,600 grams. Compare the black kitten with this raw meat kitten. The sheen, the sparkle of the eyes, the well-developed face. Nutritional studies often look at skeletal development as a rather vital index of dietary sufficiency. This is a raw meat animal with the full, round face. A later examination of the skull showed a firmly developed zygomatic arch. The frontal sinuses were complete, and calcium content of the bones throughout the body ranged from 12 to 17% by weight. The skulls of adult cats with a long ancestry of raw food diets are surprisingly constant. Here we find the development of a second-generation cooked meat animal. The head has begun to flatten and is actually smaller than the comparable raw meat cat. The skull shows the major reasons for this change. The zygomatic arch is not completed. The nasal development is somewhat irregular, and the calcium content has fallen to 10%. Third-generation cooked meat animals show the most remarkable skeletal change. The skull is considerably smaller. It is flat with pointed features. The skull shows a poorly developed zygomatic arch. The bones are paper-thin and soft like sponge rubber. The frontal sinuses had developed in a peculiar fashion, and the calcium content of the bones had fallen to a low 3% by weight. Activity level is another index of interest. In this pen, there is an obvious difference in activity level between the raw meat animals and the cooked meat animals. One of these cooked meat kittens actually had a broken back resulting from a failure in development. Moving into the third generation of experimental animals, the degeneration was even more pronounced. The smaller animal is a cooked meat kitten and is actually the oldest of the 3. The kitten on the left is a second-generation raw meat cat, and the one on the right is a second-generation cooked meat cat. Here is a second-generation cooked meat mother with her third-generation offspring. She has a male body configuration. Her offspring developed nasal and ocular allergies. From this same litter came an asthmatic kitten, purportedly the first to be reported in the research literature. Again, there is marked dental deterioration, abscesses, poor coloring, and gingival irritation. Pronounced exhaustion was a typical observation among the third generation of cooked meat kittens, as well as impaired coordination. This third-generation cooked meat kitten had over 24 fractures resulting from a failure in development. And finally, this little third-generation cooked meat kitten was unable to release its claws from the hardware cloth, and probably would have died had not the assistant taken it down. At this juncture in the study, a most interesting development emerged. The cooked meat cats were unable to successfully reproduce after the third generation. Most were void of sexual interests, and those that had attempted to mate could only produce stillborn litters. On the other hand, the raw meat animals continued to reproduce healthy offspring generation after generation. The notion that specific nutritional factors in food may be destroyed by heat processing is obviously not far-fetched. Physiological deterioration down the generations is quite graphic, and according to Pottinger, the process was found to be reversible only with great difficulty. He did demonstrate that the animals could make considerable gains towards physiological normalcy, but it took 4 generations of a raw food diet before the animals regained their native structure and original level of well-being. An interesting sidelight came 6 months after the experiment's conclusion, when volunteer weeds emerged in the fallow pens. In the raw milk pens, the plants flourished. In the pasteurized milk pens, the growth was somewhat less hardy. Plants in the evaporated milk pens struggled, and the sweetened condensed milk pen speaks for itself. At a later date, navy beans were planted in the respective pens, with parallel results. What are we to make of these numerous observations? I suppose one could easily slip into pessimism when translating these findings into terms of human deficiency. However, there are certain redeeming features that should be examined. From the beginning,
There's a place that I know where the trees are still low. The water still flows gently down the stream, where the air is still clean and the people still dream, and the wildflowers still grow back every spring, where the birds sing their songs and the people get along, and the neighbors still come visit every day, where the food is still grown from the seeds that we've sown, and the people still gather round to sing. Far from the city lights, the moon glows in the night. The god and the goddess are still